Alara's laughter rang out over the golden fields of New Eden as she chased butterflies, her small hands reaching for their delicate wings. The colony, nestled on a quiet planet far from the conflicts of the galactic core, was her sanctuary, a place of peace and innocence. Her father, John Kalin, watched from the porch, a rare smile on his rugged face. After years as an engineer on distant starships, he'd found his purpose here, raising his daughter in safety. But safety, as it turned out, was fleeting. The tranquility shattered when the sky above the colony darkened. A massive alien ship, jagged and predatory, descended like a bird of prey. Its engines roared, drowning out screams as colonists scrambled for cover. Alara froze, her wide eyes reflecting the monstrous vessel. "Alara, run!" John shouted, bolting from the porch. But it was too late. Before he could reach her, a beam of light enveloped the child, lifting her into the air. She screamed for her father, her small hands reaching for him as she was pulled toward the ship. John's heart pounded as he raced forward, but the alien craft was already ascending. He fired his old plasma pistol, the bolts fizzling uselessly against the ship's shields. Within moments, it disappeared into the atmosphere, leaving only silence and John's anguished cry behind. The Skrell had taken her. The Skrell were infamous across the galaxy, a brutal race of raiders who thrived on fear and destruction. Rumors painted them as sadistic monsters, offering captives to their mythical dragon beast as a twisted form of sacrifice. John had dismissed such tales as exaggerations, but now, with his daughter in their clutches, they became terrifyingly real. John wasted no time. He raced to the colony's hangar, where his ship, the Perseverance, sat in disrepair. It was an aging craft, its hull patched with mismatched metals, and its engines prone to failure. But it was all he had. Inside, John worked with furious precision, his hands flying over controls and wiring. Memories of his days in deep space engineering came flooding back. He fortified the ship's shields, tuned its weapons, and recalibrated its ancient jump drive. All the while his mind was consumed by Alara's face, her fear, her helpless cries for him. As he worked, the colony's leaders gathered, urging him to wait for reinforcements. "You can't take on the Skrell alone," one said, his voice laced with fear. "They're too powerful. You'll get yourself killed, and Alara with you." John's jaw tightened. "If I wait, they'll feed her to that beast. I'm not letting that happen." Fueling his ship and strapping on his pistol, John prepared for the most dangerous journey of his life. As the Perseverance lifted off, the colony grew smaller below him, its lights dimming against the vast darkness of space. His destination, the volcanic world of Kragnar, the Skrell's stronghold, a place of fire, ash, and death. But John was a father before anything else, and no force in the galaxy, not the Skrell, not their dragon, not even death, would keep him from his daughter. "This isn't the end," he muttered to himself as the stars blurred into hyperspace. "Not for her. Not for me." The hunt for Alara had begun. The volcanic planet of Kragnar loomed ahead, its surface a chaotic expanse of molten rivers and jagged rock formations. Plumes of ash rose into the atmosphere, casting an eerie orange glow. John Kalin gripped the controls of the Perseverance, his jaw clenched as turbulence rattled the ship. Kragnar was a fortress as much as it was a planet. Its fiery terrain made it nearly impossible to approach undetected. The Skrell had built their stronghold deep within its most hostile regions, where the heat alone could incinerate an unprotected ship. John's scanners flickered as he approached the atmosphere. The heat shields he had hastily reinforced groaned under the pressure, warning lights flashing on the console. He ignored them, his focus razor-sharp. "Hold together," he muttered, pushing the ship into a steep descent. The Perseverance pierced the thick layers of ash, emerging over a sprawling wasteland of lava flows and blackened mountains. In the distance, he spotted the Skrell's base, a towering structure carved into the side of a molten cliff. Its architecture was grotesque, with spires that seemed to claw at the sky and crimson banners bearing the Skrell's insignia. John adjusted the ship's trajectory, landing on a narrow plateau a few kilometers from the stronghold. He powered down the engines and activated the camouflage field, an old, unreliable device, but his only chance at avoiding detection. Grabbing his modified plasma rifle and a small pack of supplies, he stepped onto the scorching surface of Kragnar. The heat was suffocating, the air thick with the acrid stench of sulfur. John activated the environmental seal on his suit, his boots crunching against the volcanic rock as he moved toward the base. Every step felt heavier, weighed down by the knowledge of what he might face inside. As he neared the base, the faint sound of guttural Skrell voices reached his ears. He crouched behind a jagged outcrop, peering at the massive gates guarded by two towering Skrell warriors. Their black armor shimmered in the heat, and their curved blades glinted ominously. John's heart raced as he formulated a plan. The gates were impenetrable, and the guards were too heavily armed for a direct assault. He scanned the area, his engineer's mind working rapidly. Then he spotted it, a ventilation shaft high on the cliffside, its metal cover warped from the heat. "Not the front door, then," he muttered, beginning his climb. The ascent was brutal. The cliff's surface was uneven, and the heat from the molten rivers below made every movement a test of endurance. John's gloves burned against the rock, but he gritted his teeth and pushed forward. By the time he reached the vent, his suit's environmental systems were on the brink of failing. Prying the cover loose, John crawled inside, the narrow shaft barely accommodating his frame. The heat inside was stifling, and the metal walls seemed to pulse with the energy of the planet. He moved slowly, his plasma rifle at the ready. As he inched deeper into the base, the faint echoes of Skrell voices grew louder. He reached a grate and peered through, his heart clenching at what he saw. The cavernous chamber below was filled with Skrell warriors, their grotesque forms illuminated by the flickering light of molten pools. At the center of the room stood a massive cage, its bars glowing red-hot. Inside, huddled in a corner, was Alara. John's breath caught in his throat. She looked unharmed but terrified, her small frame dwarfed by the monstrous surroundings. Before he could move, the chamber shook as a deafening roar echoed through the stronghold. From a tunnel opposite the cage, a massive creature emerged. The dragon was a nightmare made flesh. Its scales shimmered like molten obsidian, and its eyes burned with an unnatural red light. It moved with a predatory grace, its massive claws clicking against the stone floor. Heat radiated from its body, distorting the air around it. John's hands tightened around his rifle. The creature was even larger than he had imagined, its head nearly scraping the cavern's high ceiling. The Skrell warriors bowed as it approached, chanting in their guttural tongue. The dragon's eyes locked onto the cage. Alara whimpered, pressing herself against the bars. The beast sniffed the air, its nostrils flaring. Then, to John's shock, it stopped. The dragon tilted its head, its glowing eyes narrowing as if confused. The Skrell leader, a hulking figure clad in ornate armor, stepped forward. "The tribute is ready," he bellowed in their harsh language. "Feast, mighty Zerthar, consume the child and grow stronger." The dragon didn't move. It lowered its head slightly, sniffing at the cage. Alara stared up at it, her wide eyes filled with fear and something else. Curiosity. John's mind raced. The dragon wasn't attacking. It seemed almost hesitant. He didn't know why, but he wasn't about to waste the opportunity. Carefully, he removed a small EMP grenade from his pack. It was a gamble. The Skrell's technology might be resistant, but it was the only way to disable the cage's power field. He primed the grenade, counting silently, then tossed it into the chamber. The explosion was silent but effective. The lights in the room flickered as the cage's energy field collapsed. Chaos erupted as the Skrell warriors shouted, their attention turning to the source of the disturbance. John didn't hesitate. He dropped from the ventilation shaft, landing hard on the cavern floor. He fired his rifle, the blue plasma bolt striking two Skrell before they could react. "Benera," he shouted, running toward the cage. "Daddy!" she cried, her face lighting up with hope. The dragon turned its massive head, fixing its gaze on John. For a terrifying moment, he thought it would attack. But then it did something unexpected. It stepped back, lowering its head as if to shield Alara from the chaos. John reached the cage, smashing the lock with the butt of his rifle. The door swung open, and Alara threw herself into his arms. "I knew you'd come," she sobbed. "I've got you, sweetheart," he said, holding her tightly. "We're getting out of here." But the Skrell weren't done. The leader roared, rallying his warriors. "Kill the human! Kill the girl!" John turned, his rifle raised, but he knew they were outnumbered. Then, the dragon roared again, a sound so powerful it shook the chamber. The beast lunged at the Skrell, its massive claws tearing through their ranks. Flames erupted from its maw, engulfing the warriors in a torrent of fire. John stared in disbelief. The dragon wasn't attacking him or Alara, it was protecting them. "Daddy, he's helping us," Alara exclaimed, clutching his arm. "I see that," John said, his voice filled with awe. "Let's not waste the chance." With the dragon clearing the way, John carried Alara toward the tunnel leading out of the chamber. The dragon followed, its fiery breath keeping the Skrull at bay. As they ran, John couldn't help but glance back at the massive creature, its burning eyes meeting his. For the first time, he saw not a monster, but an ally. John sprinted through the winding tunnels of the Skrull stronghold, Alara clinging tightly to his neck. Behind them, the dragon, Zerthar, roared, its massive body thundering down the passageways, flames erupting from its jaws to hold back the pursuing Skrull warriors. The tunnels shook with every step the dragon took, its claws scraping against the stone walls. Yet it didn't attack John or Alara. Instead, it stayed close behind, shielding them from the onslaught of plasma fire that echoed through the cavern. "Daddy," Alara whispered, her voice trembling, "he's helping us. Why is he helping us?" John didn't have an answer. The creature, bred and trained by the Skrull to be a weapon of terror, was now acting as their protector. The beast's glowing red eyes, once terrifying, now seemed determined. Its actions didn't stem from instinct alone. There was intelligence in its movements, a choice in its defiance of its masters. "Whatever the reason," John muttered, "I'm not complaining." A burst of plasma fire struck the wall beside him, showering him with sparks. He spun, firing his rifle with one hand, while keeping Alara shielded. The bolts found their marks, dropping 2 Skrull warriors who had flanked them. But more were coming. "Zerthar!" John shouted, unsure if the dragon could even understand him. "We need cover!" The dragon roared in response, surging forward. Its massive tail swept through the narrow passage, collapsing part of the tunnel and blocking the Skrull's advance. John used the moment to press onward, guided by the faint light of his ship's tracking beacon. As they neared the surface, the air grew hotter, the volcanic heat mixing with the tension of their escape. John's steps faltered as he reached a cavern opening, only to find a squad of heavily armed Skrull blocking the exit. Their leader, clad in black armor adorned with glowing red sigils, sneered. "You dare steal our tribute?" the leader growled, leveling a high-powered energy weapon at John. "The beast belongs to us. Surrender now, human, or die." John tightened his grip on Alara, his mind racing for options. He could take a shot, but the odds weren't in his favor. Then, with a thunderous crash, Zerthar stepped forward, positioning itself between John and the Skrull. The dragon's spines flared, and it let out a low, guttural growl that made even the hardened warriors hesitate. The leader snarled, signaling his troops to fire. Plasma bolts streaked through the air, but Zerthar raised its wings, the blasts deflecting harmlessly off its obsidian-like scales. The dragon's mouth opened, and a torrent of fire erupted, engulfing the Skrull squad. The intense heat forced John to shield Alara's face as the screams of their attackers faded into silence. When the flames subsided, the exit was clear. Zerthar turned its massive head to John, rumbling softly. For a moment, man and beast locked eyes. There was no malice in the dragon's gaze, only an unspoken understanding. "Thanks," John said, nodding. "Let's get out of here." The Perseverance was visible in the distance, perched precariously on the edge of a volcanic plateau. John's heart raced as he sprinted toward it, Alara still clinging to him. Zerthar followed closely, its massive frame moving with surprising grace. Just as they reached the ship, an alarm on John's wrist communicator blared. His ship's sensors had detected multiple incoming Skrull ships. He glanced skyward, spotting 3 dark shapes descending rapidly, their sleek designs glinting in the fiery light. "Skrull reinforcements," he muttered, setting Alara down gently. "Get inside the ship, sweetheart. Strap in." "But what about you?" she asked, her voice shaking. "I'll be right behind you. Go." Alara hesitated but obeyed, disappearing into the ship. John turned to Zerthar, who had already noticed the approaching ships. The dragon growled, its wings spreading as it faced the oncoming threat. "Stay close," John said, climbing into the pilot's seat. The Perseverance roared to life, its engines struggling against the intense heat. As the Skrull ships opened fire, John engaged the ship's shields and lifted off the ground. Zerthar leapt into the air, its powerful wings beating against the volcanic winds. The dragon soared alongside the Perseverance, weaving through plasma fire with remarkable agility. John watched in awe as the creature unleashed bursts of flame, forcing two of the Skrull ships to scatter. The third ship, a larger vessel, bristling with weapons, locked onto the Perseverance. Alarms blared as its targeting systems zeroed in. John swerved, narrowly avoiding a missile that exploded just below the ship. "Come on, you big bastard," John muttered, pushing the engines to their limit. The Perseverance jolted as another missile grazed its shields. Sparks flew from the console, and Alara screamed from the back. "Daddy," she cried, "I've got this." John shouted, though his heart pounded with fear. Before the larger ship could fire again, Zerthar roared and dove straight for it. The dragon's claws tore into the vessel's hull, ripping through its armor with terrifying precision. Flames engulfed the enemy ship as Zerthar unleashed its full fury, sending it spiraling into the molten surface below. The remaining Skrull ships, seeing their leader destroyed, retreated into the clouds, their engines screaming as they disappeared from sight. John exhaled shakily, his hands trembling as he steadied the Perseverance. "Alara, you okay?" he called. "I'm okay," she shouted back. "What about Zerthar?" John turned his gaze to the dragon, now gliding effortlessly alongside the ship. Its scales glimmered in the volcanic light, and despite the chaos of the battle, it looked unscathed. The creature rumbled softly, its glowing eyes meeting John's. "Not bad, big guy," John said with a grin. "Not bad at all." As the Perseverance ascended into the upper atmosphere, Zerthar followed, its massive wings carrying it effortlessly through the thinning air. John adjusted the ship's trajectory, setting a course for New Eden. Alara emerged from the cockpit, her face lighting up as she saw the dragon through the viewport. "Daddy, is Zerthar coming with us?" John hesitated, glancing at the creature. Zerthar let out a deep, resonant growl that seemed almost friendly. "Looks like it," John said, smiling. "Guess we've got a new friend." As the stars enveloped them, father, daughter, and dragon left Kragnar behind, united by an unlikely bond forged in fire and courage. As the Perseverance hurtled through hyperspace, John sat in the cockpit, adjusting the ship's damaged systems. Sparks occasionally sputtered from the panels, and the engines groaned, struggling to maintain their course. Yet John couldn't help but glance at the viewport, where Zerthar soared beside them, keeping pace with the ship even at its breakneck speed. Alara had curled up in one of the rear seats, fast asleep after the chaos they had endured. Her tiny face was peaceful, though tear-streaked. John's heart ached as he thought of how close he had come to losing her. The comms console beeped, breaking the quiet moment. John pressed a button, and the monitor displayed Zerthar's glowing form outside the ship. The dragon's massive wings folded slightly as it maneuvered closer, its molten eyes locked on John. The creature rumbled softly, the sound reverberating through the ship's hull. "You don't look like you're going back to Kragnar anytime soon," John muttered. He leaned back in his chair, rubbing a hand over his face. "I guess you've made your choice." He turned to Alara, who had begun to stir. Her eyes fluttered open, and she smiled sleepily when she saw Zerthar through the window. "He's staying with us, isn't he, Daddy?" John hesitated, looking between his daughter and the dragon. "Looks like it," he said. "He's not exactly subtle, though. Can't exactly hide him back on New Eden." Alara giggled, her voice light despite the weight of their recent ordeal. "We'll make it work. He saved us. He's part of our family now." Zerthar roared softly as if in agreement. John couldn't help but smile. "All right, big guy," he said, tapping a few buttons to stabilize their course. "Welcome to the family, but no incinerating the neighbors." The Perseverance emerged from hyperspace, the serene blue-green orb of New Eden filling the viewport. Compared to the volcanic chaos of Kragnar, the sight of home was a balm to John's frayed nerves. He angled the ship toward the colony, sending a message ahead to inform them of their arrival. As they descended, Zerthar followed close, his massive wings casting shadows over the fields below. The colony's residents gathered quickly, their faces a mix of relief and awe. Many had believed John's mission to save Alara was suicidal, and the sight of both father and daughter alive, and accompanied by a dragon, left them speechless. The ship landed with a hiss of steam as the damaged engines powered down. John stepped out first, his boots crunching against the gravel. He turned and helped Alara climb down, her small hand clutching his tightly. Zerthar landed a short distance away, the ground trembling under his weight. The dragon folded his wings, his molten eyes scanning the gathered crowd. The colony leader, an older woman named Marl, stepped forward cautiously. Her gaze flicked from John to Alara and finally to the enormous creature. "John," she said slowly, her voice tinged with both amazement and concern. "What is that?" "This," John said, gesturing to Zerthar, "is Zerthar. He's the reason we're standing here right now." Marl's eyes narrowed. "You brought a dragon to the colony?" John sighed, already anticipating the arguments. "He's not a threat. He protected us from the Skrell. Without him, we'd both be dead." Alara stepped forward, her small voice cutting through the murmurs of the crowd. "He's my friend. He saved me." The colony fell silent as Zerthar lowered his massive head, rumbling softly. It was a sound that wasn't threatening, but almost gentle. Marl studied the dragon for a long moment before nodding. "If he's earned your trust, John, then he's earned ours. But the colony will have questions, and we'll need to figure out how to feed him." John chuckled despite himself, one problem at a time. Over the next few days, Zerthar became an unexpected part of the colony. While his presence initially caused unease, the dragon quickly proved himself to be more than a symbol of fear. He helped plow fields with his powerful tail, cleared debris with ease, and even protected the colony's livestock from predators. His bond with Alara was particularly striking. She often sat beside him, chatting as though he were another human. John, meanwhile, worked tirelessly to repair the Perseverance and strengthen the colony's defenses. The Skrell would not take their defeat lightly, and John knew they would return. The colony needed to be ready. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, John found Alara sitting by Zerthar, her small hand resting on the dragon's massive forepaw. She looked up at her father as he approached. "He's sad," she said quietly. John frowned, crouching beside her. "Sad? Why do you say that?" "He misses something," Alara said, her voice soft. "I don't know what, but he does." John studied the dragon, noting the way Zerthar's glowing eyes seemed to reflect the setting sun. "He's been through a lot," John said, placing a hand on his daughter's shoulder. "Just like us." Alara looked thoughtful. "Maybe we can help him, like he helped us." John smiled, ruffling her hair. "You've got a big heart, kiddo." As the stars began to fill the sky, Zerthar lifted his head and let out a low, resonant roar. It wasn't one of anger or warning, but of something deeper, perhaps a call to others of his kind. John and Alara watched in silence, wondering if there were answers hidden in the stars above. For now, Zerthar was home, and together they would face whatever came next. Peace in New Eden was short-lived. Days after John and Alara's return, alarms blared across the colony as Skrell warships emerged from hyperspace. The haunting shapes of their vessels cast shadows over the planet's surface, their engines humming with an ominous resonance. The Skrell had come for vengeance, and for Zerthar. John stood at the colony's central command hub, his jaw tight as he studied the incoming fleet on the radar. "They didn't take long," he muttered, gripping the edge of the console. Marl, the colony leader, stood beside him, her face pale but resolute. "What do they want?" John glanced out the viewport, where Zerthar stood at the edge of the settlement, his glowing red eyes fixed on the sky. "They want him," John said, "and they'll destroy us to get him." The colony's defenses were meager, designed to fend off pirates and small raiding parties, not a full-scale invasion. But John had no intention of giving up. "Get everyone to the shelters," he ordered Marl. "I'll handle the rest." Marl hesitated. "And how exactly do you plan to stop them?" John looked at Zerthar. "With him." As the first Skrell dropships descended, Zerthar roared, his voice shaking the ground. The dragon's massive wings unfurled, and he took to the sky, his obsidian scales glinting in the sunlight. John climbed into the Perseverance, now partially repaired and armed with makeshift weapons. Alara, despite his protests, climbed in beside him. "You're not staying behind," she said firmly, her small face set with determination. John sighed. "Fine, but you stay in the co-pilot seat and do exactly as I say." The Perseverance lifted off, its engines sputtering but holding steady. John piloted the ship alongside Zerthar, the dragon gliding effortlessly through the air. "All right, big guy," John said through the comms, though he wasn't sure Zerthar could understand. "Let's give them a fight they won't forget." The first wave of Skrell fighters swooped in, their plasma cannons firing relentlessly. Zerthar darted between the blasts with agility that belied his size, unleashing streams of fire that melted the enemy ships mid-air. The dragon's roar echoed across the battlefield, a sound that struck fear into the hearts of the attackers. John maneuvered the Perseverance behind Zerthar, using the dragon's massive form as partial cover. He fired the ship's newly installed cannons, taking out a Skrull dropship as it attempted to land near the colony. "They're everywhere," Alara exclaimed, her hands gripping the edge of the console. "Keep calm," John said, his voice steady despite the chaos. "We've got this." As the battle raged on, the Skrull deployed their trump card, a massive warship that dwarfed the colony below. Its cannons fired beams of searing energy, cutting swaths through the terrain. Zerthar roared in defiance, flying directly toward the ship. "Wait, what is he doing?" John shouted as the dragon charged the warship. Plasma fire rained down, but Zerthar spun and dodged, his flames scorching the ship's hull. The dragon latched onto the vessel, his claws tearing through its armor as he climbed toward the main cannon. From the cockpit of the Perseverance, John and Alara watched as Zerthar battled the warship. The dragon's ferocity was unmatched, but the Skrull were relentless. Smaller fighters swarmed him, their plasma bolts finding weak points in his scales. "He's getting overwhelmed," John muttered, his hands tightening on the controls. "We have to help him." He piloted the Perseverance directly into the fray, targeting the smaller ships that harassed Zerthar. Alara manned the auxiliary weapons, her small hands steady as she fired on the attackers. "Hang on, Zerthar," she shouted. The dragon roared, his spines flaring as he tore through the warship's main cannon. The weapon exploded in a fiery blaze, sending shockwaves rippling through the air. But the effort cost Zerthar dearly. A concentrated volley from the Skrull fighters struck his wings, and he plummeted toward the ground. "No," Alara cried. John pushed the Perseverance into a steep dive, following Zerthar's descent. The dragon crashed into the earth with a thunderous impact, carving a massive crater into the colony's outskirts. Dust and debris filled the air as John landed the ship nearby. He and Alara ran to Zerthar's side, their hearts pounding. The dragon's massive body was battered and bloodied, his breathing labored, but his molten eyes remained defiant, fixed on the remaining Skrull forces. "Don't you dare give up," John said, placing a hand on Zerthar's flank. "We're not done yet." The warship, now crippled but still airborne, turned its remaining weapons toward the colony. John realized they had one last chance to stop it. "Alara, stay here," he said, his voice firm. "Take care of him." "What are you going to do?" she asked, her eyes wide with fear. John grabbed a portable plasma charge from the ship. "End this." With Zerthar too injured to fly, John piloted the Perseverance toward the warship. He maneuvered through enemy fire, evading blasts that could tear the ship apart. As he approached the vessel's core, he activated the plasma charge, setting its timer for detonation. "Come on," he muttered, his hands steady as he navigated through the warship's defenses. He launched the charge into the ship's exposed reactor, watching as it embedded itself deep within the machinery. The timer ticked down. John pulled the Perseverance into a sharp climb, the engines screaming in protest. Behind him, the warship erupted in a massive explosion, lighting up the sky. The shockwave rocked the Perseverance, but the ship held together as John steered it back toward the colony. On the ground, Alara watched as the warship disintegrated. Tears streamed down her face as she turned to Zerthar, who rumbled softly, his eyes still glowing faintly. "He did it," she whispered. "We're safe." John landed the Perseverance moments later, stumbling out of the ship. Alara ran to him, throwing her arms around his neck. "Daddy!" "It's over," John said, holding her tightly. "We're safe." He looked to Zerthar, who lifted his massive head slightly, a deep, resonant growl escaping his throat. John approached the dragon, placing a hand on his side. "You saved us all," he said. "Rest now, you've earned it." The colony, though scarred by the battle, stood strong. The Skrull had been defeated, and Zerthar's bravery had earned him a place among the people. As the sun rose over New Eden, father, daughter, and dragon sat together, bound by a bond forged in fire and resilience. For John and Alara, Zerthar was more than a protector, he was family. And together, they would face whatever challenges the galaxy had yet to throw their way.